believe in fate. Not necessarily some divine concept of a group of gals cutting gilded thread, but just the idea that in life you can be destined to do or become something. That there is a certain path you're on, and if you do everything right, you'll achieve some life of greatness you were supposed to have. It can often seem a bit of an aged term these days, since we really only often hear of fate and destiny and myth and gallant tales of knights and queens, but on some base level you may believe it. You may believe that there is luck and fate and karma within the world, and your life is tied to a specific roadmap that you've yet to know. Sometimes we feel this due to societal expectations, familial plans for the next generation, or even just private desires. But that begs the question, what benefit do you get from believing in a concept like fate? A sense of security, I suppose, that things will be how they're meant to be, but alternatively, what do you lose? Well, when you look at life as a sort of set-in-stone ideal, you can definitely become driven by and obsessed with what you think needs to happen for the right outcomes to occur, rather than just kind of experiencing life and responding to those experiences as they happen. Many a legend of old ran into just that trap of fate and obsession, but then why do we still love to be obsessed? It seems often life is made out to be an all-or-nothing game where you must obsess over getting the right outcome. Maybe that's because life's finite, and we can often worry that we're doing it wrong and wasting our lives, but before we get too introspective and metaphysical, let me better demonstrate what I'm getting at with today's movie, 2007's Meet the Robinsons. So come along with me and explore the importance of taking risks, the dangers of obsession, the value of failure, and how this utopian view of the future is actually a demonstration of why you will never truly become who you thought you'd be. Yeah, there's not really a lighthearted way to say that, but hey, come on, it'll be fun! Alright, so to start, it's worth talking a bit about the insanity that is this movie's plot and how it came to be, though it's also important to know that I'm not going to argue to you that Meet the Robinsons is an underrated Disney film of the 2000s. I actually think it's near perfectly rated, sitting somewhere between a 68% critical and 74% audience score. That isn't to say that I think it's a bad movie, though. I'm a fan of this movie. It has that hopeful, carefree funness about it that I think was lost in the 2010s somewheres. It's the kind of bright future movie that defined the new millennium. It has charm, wit, and for the most part, a serviceable plot. Now, does it completely fall apart in the third act, becoming somewhat nonsensical and pointless for the sake of wrapping up the story in a tight 90 minutes? Yes. But it also explores some really interesting and complex ideas, or, well, it alludes to them. And that's what I want to talk about today, and use this video to explore those ideas. And if you're asking yourself, Nap, what gives you the right to talk about this movie and take swings at what you think it's saying, huh? Yeah, that's right. I bet you didn't know I was cool like that I was in the trenches for this movie, and often forgot about darling of the video game industry. Look at the Metacritic score. No negative reviews. Certified classic. Magnum opus of movie tie-in games. Nintendo Gamer even said it was, quote, one of those not at all interesting ideas. And IGN raved, saying a really surprising game in the sense that it doesn't completely suck, so yeah. Oh man, is this one of those times where you find out that your childhood games no one actually liked or played? Well, at least I know everybody loved Ratatouille for the Game Boy, right? Right? Anyway, my credentials aside, the movie finds its origins as a trio of ideas, and I'll summarize them as a quote, a book, and a catchphrase. The quote part most people are already familiar with, as it appears at the end of the film, but interestingly, what appears at the end is an edited version of it. The original quote is supposedly from a speech Walt Disney actually gave at WED Enterprises, originally Ratlaw Enterprises, and the original holding company for what would become the Walt Disney Company. And the quote in full was, "There's really no secret about our approach. We keep moving forward, opening up new doors and doing new things because we're curious. And curiosity keeps leading us down new paths. We're always exploring and experimenting. At WED, We call it imagineering, the blending of creative imagination with technical know-how. Off the bat, it is a bit of a different quote than what's at the end of the movie, but more so in delivery rather than intent, changing up some of the language, but I actually kinda like the original quote better. I think it speaks more to the inventor and futurist Lewis is meant to be cast as in the movie, and it also feels more like a real phrase out of a speech rather than something cut together to fit the movie's narrative. And it speaks more to the sense of curiosity and risk-taking that the movie's trying to promote, highlighting that to move a project or an idea forward, you kinda need to balance your approach and be curious about alternatives. You can't let yourself get bogged down in tunnel vision. If a house is on fire and you're focused too much on finding the door, you won't notice an open window. The idea that you ought to consider alternatives in pursuit of your goals and that you should be flexible in your ways of thinking is definitely not original to this movie, but it is seen throughout it, from Lewis shifting and pivoting on his designs of his memory scanner all the way to how Lewis outthinks his enemy to overcome Doris, the evil bowler hat robot. He constantly blends the creative with the technical. Arguably, as a character, Lewis is the embodiment of imagineering, which makes perfect sense given the city he creates is named Todayland, subtle as a gun, and a clear nod to Epcot and Walt's very own Tomorrowland. Because in many ways, this film is a love letter to the utopian hopes Walt Disney espoused. Whether or not you personally feel Walt was genuine, or if you feel the utopian promise was just kind of a marketing scheme, I do think it's interesting to get this new age peek into Walt's vision, specifically from John Lasseter's perspective and the nostalgia-laden perspective the Disney company seemed to have for itself in the new millennium. Because this movie came out during a time when internally Disney was changing, not just in leadership with Lasseter, but in how they would approach things, releasing just 2 years before Disney would fully turn away from their 2D animation studio in 2009, right after Princess and the Frog, which is an odd dichotomy of simultaneously trying to keep this perception of Disney magic and Walt Disney under glass as like this everlasting nostalgic mosaic versus embracing new technologies and economic philosophies as a corporation. Somewhat ironically, the stylistic choices Disney made to evoke the classic 50s and 60s futurist style, whilst using the new and modern animation techniques of 3D animation, kinda gives the whole movie a sort of plastic shininess. It can cynically be read as the movie having this baked-in fakeness about the whole thing, as it feels it's missing the grit that the style's originators like Flash Gordon or 1927's Metropolis or other futurist pulp fiction films had out of necessity, but that the modern version can forgo out of convenience and in favor of greater profit, as it would cost more to bother animating in the grit and blemishes that came inherently with the inspiring works. Which, if you're embracing the ideals of the quote that appears in the movie, is fine, but arguably ignores the intent of the original quote, which implied a need to balance creative and artistic value in projects in animation with technical capabilities of the future. Imagineering isn't just moving forward, after all. But hey, the quote ain't the movie. There's nothing about wacky family hijinks, octopus butlers, or bowler hats in that quote. No, that part of the story was very loosely based on a children's book, A Day with Wilbur Robinson. It's kind of incredible, actually, how much the movie used that book for its characters, while adding some additional stakes to the plot. I mean, the characters almost all come from this cute little picture book, some being one-for-one recreations despite the altered circumstances of the main story, and I can understand why they didn't change the characters. The book's story is short and insubstantial, but wonderful, and it exudes endless charm. There wouldn't be enough plot for a full movie, but keeping these characters makes total sense, and I know in an adaptation, of course, you're going to keep elements, but the main plot itself is so different. In the book, Lewis is Wilbur's neighbor, just coming to visit, and while the familial antics that ensue are basically the same as the movie, where Lewis meets all the family, right down to searching for the missing teeth as a plot point, that's about all that stays the same, though the design and aesthetics really do find their origin in the book, minus the glossy Tomorrowland setting. The movie story is very different, with Wilbur being Lewis's son, traveling back in time to try to prevent the destruction of the future by a giant spidery bowler hat robot, while Lewis's former orphan roommate is obsessing over revenge against Lewis for keeping him awake one night as kids. So, it's a little different from the visiting your neighbor's story, but the charm of the Robinson family is unmistakably there, as an invention of the book's author, William Joyce, who also made other books that became some of my favorite movies growing up, like Robots and Rise of the Guardians. Pretty well all the endearing whimsy of the Robinson family is entirely Joyce's design. That isn't to say there isn't a Disney influence on the story, though. The adaptations, choices, and expansions of the story by Disney are actually why I'm making this video. That's where all the content around obsession, failure, and contention around who will become comes from. I just think it's interesting that it's all extrapolated out of a picture book about a boy visiting his neighbor, so perhaps you'll keep with me as I string these little red connecting lines onto the digital corkboard and suggest this movie touches on complex topics. Because if John Lasseter and Steven Anderson can extrapolate a kid's playdate into a mind-controlling bowler hat robot spider that wants to wipe out its inventor before they leave an orphanage, then I can extrapolate how this movie explores themes of twisted obsession and the value of failing at your lifelong goals. Which sounds bad when said like that, but I promise it'll make so much sense. It's baked right into the catchphrase. Oh yeah, the catchphrase. Keep moving forward. This is the hallmark line of the whole film, snatched right out of Walt's quote, and smattered throughout the movie as if it were gospel teaching. And it's catchy. It can easily join the likes of such phrases as just do it, the happiest place on earth, keep calm, carry on, winnie weedy weet gee, live, laugh, love, you name it. It's simple, communicative, and probably leaves marketing majors frothing at the mouth. But what does it mean? Well, I mean, literally, it just means keep going. You don't need me to figure that part out, but subtextually, beyond the obvious, what is the story point of the repetition of this phrase? Not the plot point, the story point. Because while within the plot, it is portrayed as being an integral lesson for Lewis to overcome his frustrations with failing and to embrace the peace and beauty of creation as an act rather than an outcome, it's also a foil to the development of the bowler hat guy, Lewis's former roommate Goob. Because in a normal timeline, Lewis never needs this lesson. He succeeds with his memory scanner and the rest is history. His motto of keep moving forward came to him later in life. So within the context of the story, this motto stands as more of a narrative tool than a lesson for Lewis. Well, I guess it's unclear. Time travel at the best of times kind of makes plot lines into a bit of a tangled mess, and this movie certainly is not great for consistency with how it applies the rules of time travel. No, seriously, time travel in the third act makes no sense. If the bowler hat guy going back and signing this contract changes the future so drastically, why was there no change from the fact Lewis's memory scanner failed in the first place? Or any of the other changes to the timeline? Like, how's the whole Robinson family still here in the future to chase him if Lewis never got adopted at the science fair? And why does Lewis acknowledging that he wouldn't make Doris change anything? Presumably in this timeline, he never made her anyway. Okay, no, I'm getting off track. This isn't a video about time travel. My point is that subtextually, the motto keep moving forward is not really about Lewis trying again and again to make an invention, or learning from failure per se. I mean, yeah, that's part of it, but it's about more than that. It's the classic lesson that you have to be open to change, in the sense that you have to be willing to respect that you are an unfinished product, and always will be. To just live requires your willingness to take each next step in finding out who you are now and what that means. To keep moving forward and keep meeting yourself. We are strangers to ourselves always, to meet and to become. To say keep moving forward doesn't inherently mean trying again, and applies to more than just inventing. In this story, it applies to Doris's obsessive need for vengeance, it's Goob's obsession with failure and betrayal, and it applies to Lewis with his growing obsession with his birth mother. Another way of phrasing the motto, keep moving forward, is simply put, move on. Why is obsession sexy? Or rather, why is it depicted as desirable, virtuous, or impressive in media? Not always. I mean, lots of stories dissect the corruption that is obsession and condemn it as such, but equally and recently, it feels like the term is more and more applied as something you ought to strive for or be. Look at movies like Oppenheimer, Black Swan, First Man, The Prestige, Amadeus, of course Whiplash. These are a handful of movies that, to a varying degree, treat obsession as elevation, as if to be obsessed is to be divine in some way, above the rest. Now, sure, lots of these movies include and demonstrate the negative and darker sides of obsession, the loss of friends and loved ones, the physical and mental toll, the isolation, and so on, but I confound you to tell me you watched a movie like Whiplash and didn't come out of it feeling or hearing from others how impressive Andrew became, or how Fletcher pushed him, but it was worth it for what he achieved. Tell me you didn't feel amped up and an inexplicable desire to learn the drums. The way that media and pop culture has leaned into the concept of being obsessed, with fads, people, and the virtue of starving or tortured artists that obsess to the brink of insanity over their goals is a dangerous sentiment. It can be captivating, but that doesn't make it not damaging, because it confuses obsession with passion. It makes it seem as though these are two sides of the same coin, but obsession is the corruption of passion. It's perfectionism and envy. It's smiling malice and warm narcissism. Obsession deludes the mind and creates a detached sense of self that is incredibly unhealthy. In the words of Stephen King, quote, "Obsession is dangerous. It's like a knife in the mind. In some cases, Dylan Thomas comes to mind, and Ross Lockridge, and Hart Crane, and Sylvia Plath. That knife of obsession can turn savagely upon the person wielding it." And that's on full display in Meet the Robinsons. Maybe not as violently, but Goob is the foil to Lewis not just as two orphans with connected storylines, but as an example of a corrupted version of Lewis's development. It's a path unknown, a what if. What if Lewis had not fixed his memory scanner? If he continued to obsess over the need to find his mother? Lewis could have been like Goob, and we see that demonstrated. Lewis was becoming obsessed. He wasn't inventing the memory scanner out of a passion for technological advancement and inquisitiveness as he had for his peanut butter gun or other such inventions. He was driven out of an unhealthy need to find his mom, to know his birth mother, as if it could remedy what he saw as his flaws. He declined potential parent interviews, ignored friends and their needs, canceled plans, took health risks, and exhausted himself, all in the pursuit of a false idol, an idea of mother that didn't even exist. That lady was never his mom. She was his obsession, a conjured escape from the world his mind obsessed over when Lewis felt unwanted. Now, I'm not saying that Lewis having goals was bad, or that having goals you strive for is bad, or even that hard work and sacrifice made to further your goals is a problem. It's incredibly important to have goals, especially presumed unobtainable ones, dreams of greatness or of some specific outcome or achievement that you want above all else is perfectly healthy. It's when these dreams become centered in your life to the point where you detach from reality and it becomes so all-encompassing, so obsessive, that then it is a problem. Obsession can get results that you may desire, but that doesn't make it a good way to accomplish these goals, and certainly doesn't come without a cost. Obsession robs you of your joy, even in the moment of victory, because it is a never-satiated beast once it's turned loose. It keeps you pigeonholed in a state of being that's incapable of growth. It closes the doors of curiosity Walt, quote, talks about, and prevents you from meeting who you could become. Doris couldn't just be content getting free. She needed revenge, but not just revenge, it had to be the ultimate and all-encompassing revenge, the utter destruction of Lewis, and it couldn't just end at that either. It had to be more, and more, and more. Goob couldn't just accept that his life diverged from Lewis's, or that he missed a catch in one game of baseball. That game was important to him. Baseball was his passion, and it's perfectly valid to be upset and hurt that his friend Lewis didn't consider his needs for rest, or that it was his own big day. But that's not a justification for the twisted mindset he gains, and in truth, is a demonstration of the cyclical hurt obsession begets. Lewis's obsession blinded him to the hurt and impact he was having on those around him, and it prevented him from caring, and so Goob became blind to the hurt and impact he caused. This movie is, on the surface, about sticking with it, hard work, finding family in your place in life, but it is also a demonstration of how your actions can and do affect the world around you, and that obsession, even in the pursuit of a noble goal, is its own trap that we construct ourselves. To that end, though, this movie still takes an optimistic view and offers an alternative path to freedom, the path of passion. To be passionate in life is to have a thirst for simply being. It doesn't have to be perfect, it just kind of has to be. Your passions can be focused, and you can desire beneficial outcomes from your passion, but it's about doing something because you enjoy it. You're driven by the fulfillment it gives, by the joy or simple pleasure of it all, because you don't have to be good at something to be passionate about it. Though it certainly helps if you are. Passion in life is a gilded existence. And okay, wow, that sounds a little sappy, hopefully maybe more poetic, but it is true. It's the thing you'll wake up for, or strive to accomplish, or just that you can find peace in. Passion can be driven and require intensive focus, but it doesn't harm. Passion won't compel you to drive to the point of no brakes. You can come up for air from it. It doesn't cling to you in your focus in the way that obsession does. Now, that doesn't mean it can't can't have negative results, some passions are not good ones to have. Passions for war and bloodshed probably never gonna be classified as positive. And your passions can be distracting. Maybe you got too into a painting session and lost track of time, but unlike obsession, it would not be intentional neglect. You don't feel those other commitments stole time from your passion. You're free and happy to embrace your passion as it comes. You aren't chained to it. You don't need it above all else. That's what I mean by being able to come up for air. Lewis was developing a need for family, a need for his technology to heal that hole, bridge that gap. This movie makes a case for the dangers of obsession corrupting your passion. A warning for if you lose the balance, both in terms of imagineering creation and in terms of your mental balance in pursuit of an idea. You need to know when to move on and meet yourself again. At the start of this movie, we meet Lewis as a passionate inventor. He has admirable goals, even if his inventions don't work exactly as planned, though I guess for real, if we're being honest, this kid would be snatched up by a tech company so quick. Who cares if his peanut butter gun didn't work perfectly? This kid built a semi-functional dual-stream cannon of condiments and a toaster helmet with advanced timing systems. Not even to mention the memory scanner, which would revolutionize brain sciences. Lewis Robinson, he built this in an orphanage with a box of scraps. No wonder Canada got invaded in this universe, which, Jesus Christ, why is such an offhand joke from 2007 about fake historical events in the 2020s so sinister and dark now? Can I get picked up from the party? Mom, I don't want to be here. And why would Montana get all of Canada anyway? No, we're getting off topic again. Back to Lewis. Lewis, his passion is simply for a better tomorrow, and the joy and process invention brings him. He's not happy his machines break, but outside of the inciting incident, where honestly, the head of the orphanage probably should have stepped in and not let Lewis run off to go become obsessed with finding a lady he'd never met. But typically, Lewis is shown to be undeterred from his inventions breaking. He's passionate about the process of it all, even if he has to change what he's working on from time to time. Sometimes you put down the peanut butter gun to tackle on another day, because passion is fluid in its freedom. It's not necessarily evergreen. Things you're passionate about now, you may not be in future, or perhaps your passion leaves and comes back stronger than ever in years to come. It's all perfectly normal. It's part of what I mean by the title, that you never stop meeting yourself. Because I think every piece of life we experience, be it media, culture, love, boredom, all of it, it's a chance to meet a new you. It's a new gear in your system, a software update. It might overwrite some old material or mesh perfectly and simply tune up the timing belts. But accepting experience as change is good. What you are or have been passionate about does not preclude growth and development from shifting these passions. Picking up a new project or new passions entirely is fine. Whereas with obsession, true obsession, it'll prevent that growth. It consumes your mind to the point where you're unwilling to let new passions take hold. Look at Goob. He held on to that obsession over his loss for decades. It festered and pustulated into a cancer guiding his every move, thought, and emotion, which is why once free of his obsession, he can begin to meet himself again, learn who he is. Passion is freedom because it can grow and shift with you. Some of us were passionate about trains as a kid and now care more for music and knitting. Some of them are still just as passionate about trains. This is all healthy flows of passion and our ability to grow. It's change taken as it comes. But what does that mean when you have a preconception of what that growth should look like? When you have an idea fated for what you will or should be? Well, who do you think you should be? Who have you been already? Who do you want to become? Big questions. The kind usually only asked by parents, therapists, employers, and school guidance counselors, all to various levels of support and genuine interest. They're complex questions, though, because we aren't static beings. There's no checkpoint to get to or experience points to achieve a specific status, and yet, a sense of being like that is central to the human experience, which I know sounds so lofty and really silly when talking about children's entertainment. I get it, but it's a topic I guess I wanted to explore, and this movie felt a fine avenue to open the floor up, express my thoughts, and kinda ask for yours. Maybe there's a safety in exploring oneself with bright, colorful animation where nothing's, quote, real, where the text isn't a verbose tome or exclusionary. Or maybe I'm an arrogant tool who wanted to sound smart talking about cartoons. Who knows, but maybe it's just that I think it lets you ask questions and leave worry of the answers for tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. Just a silly movie with tiny T-Rex hands, frog jazz, bowler hat world domination, and a peanut butter gun. Oh, but there's the rub. Shakespeare aside, pun totally intended, questions of who you are or will be are central to Lewis as a character and also to the story. I mean, it's a story where Lewis literally sees who he will be, or rather could be. Tom Selleck apparently, which, not a bad future. But seriously, it's a movie dissecting what it is to both need to change the present while trying to preserve an idolized future. That concept allows its lead to learn life lessons from his own future without knowing it's him, or that he's done any of this, getting to tinker with a time machine that Wilbur knows Lewis can build because he's already done it. That logic is flawed in universe because Lewis is yet to make his machine, but it also may intentionally be flawed to make a symbolic point. And not just the trope of the magic was always in you, rather it may be trying to demonstrate that how we learn things or come to know and understand who we are isn't necessarily a linear or knowable process. We don't always learn how to become who we'll be in the way that we thought we would or could. It's certainly a creative concept, and it all begins with a peanut butter gun. No, seriously, it's like Chekhov's peanut butter gun. This thing's played for a gag in the movie's opening, and yet comes to be fired again, serving as a symbol of impassioned failing and a need to embrace the unknown and the uncomfortable. Because the peanut butter gun still being a, quote, failed invention all the way in the future ties Lewis to the future through his creations, since, his robot Carl is his future self's invention that perpetuates the cycle. That might not make sense. What I'm saying is, Lewis is intrigued that the peanut butter gun is both still around and still non-functional, at least not consistently. It jams still. It is in some ways still the same invention Lewis is first shown to us as the audience with. Does it provide a nice, hey kids, failure's okay moment? Yeah, absolutely. But it also tells the audience that uncomfortability is important. Embracing proverbial conversations with yourself for who you wish to be is a deeply uncomfortable process. I mean, who wants to be laid bare and raw before themselves emotionally, let alone being open with others? Okay, maybe that's projection, and I'll find out in the comments that I have trust issues, but regardless, when I say this movie makes a point with its utopian future to display that you don't always become who you thought you'd be, your first reaction may be that I'm an idiot. Because what do you mean? Lewis wanted to be a genius inventor and he is that. Well, no. His obsession became not invention, but finding his mom. The context of this story implies that somehow Lewis originally got past that obsession, but I would argue they didn't put a whole lot of thought into what the true timeline was, given that this genius inventor kid lets his whole country get conquered by Montana! Come on, man. I mean, if you're gonna be an obsessive scientist, at least have an Oppenheimer moment and figure out a way to save your nation. I mean, really? Montana! You guys don't think I'm gonna lose subscribers from Montana, do you? No, sure, they can take a joke, right? Anyway, the timeline we gotta go off of is that Wilbur interceding and Lewis's new knowledge of the future is what pulls him out of that obsessive spiral. I mean, he's on that spiral right up until the moment he's about to speak to the lady dropping him off. In that moment, he accepts the uncomfortable truth that what he thought he needed or what he thought would be his destiny wasn't necessarily so. And that's okay. Sometimes we have to re-examine our actions and desires and reconsider who we are so that we're able to become who we'll be. Again, I know it's getting real metaphysical sounding or like some cheesy LA faux yoga retreat, but he literally met himself and was told, I think you're just gonna have to go back to that science fair and find out for yourself. Because the decision is still Lewis's and it's still yours. Lewis has agency in talking to himself, in this case, literally. It's agency to change, to forego his obsession and embrace the next version of himself. Talking to himself didn't give him answers for what will be, but who he could be. It's up to him if he feels his obsession would truly get him there, but I think he realizes that it wasn't the answer. In the end, this movie is the literal embodiment of both not becoming who you thought you'd be, but also meeting yourself and learning who you might be. You know, it can become a pretty tangled mess when you're literally trying to talk about two characters that are the same person, but metaphorically talking about just changing as a person. Which is normally a lot slower and more bite-sized in action than how it's done in this movie. Like, it's not a switch you flip, and it's also not just a choice for kids. I mean, you keep meeting yourself from now to 102. I mean, after that, you're on your own. I got nothing for the 103 plus crowd. But genuinely, this video wasn't trying to suggest that you have to change right this second. Maybe you're in a good spot. Maybe you're already changing. Maybe you aren't ready yet, and maybe you just want to stop and smell the roses one last time. Change is scary. I've made multiple videos exploring the idea of change in kind of just different fonts, or, well, I guess different life elements. Be that aging, embracing the unknowns in life, or in this case, letting yourself move on from what you thought you were destined for. To be willing to meet the next you. I mean, it's a big ask, but we kind of always do it subconsciously. It's not necessarily sad or anything, it's just new. You know, as a kid, I remember I wanted to be a police scientist for years. I didn't even know what it meant, but my eldest brother had gotten this CSI kit for kids, and while I was too young to be allowed near it, I thought it was so cool. And then I learned more about the occupation, and before leaving single digits, I determined, no, of course, I'm gonna be a teacher. Something about it just seemed fulfilling. Maybe I just like school. But then I got more experiences and I knew, of course, a historian. Then I got to high school, that one law class, and I was certain I'd be a lawyer. Knapp Esquire, attorney at law. It's got a great ring to it. I've even taken the LSAT, and heck, I got a decent score, but now, I don't know. Maybe I'll never use that score. Maybe I'll let it lapse over. Maybe I need to meet the new me, but who's that? Content creator? Sounds weird to say. I won't lie, it's something I wanted and dreamed of, but never really something I considered an option growing up, and it's not a career for me now either. I like making videos and streaming, because it's an outlet. It's been a place I exist, a time capsule of who I have been. I rant and rave on the internet twice a week about anything and everything with people, but just because it's fun, really. I mean, I can't say that it's, quote, the next me, but it's certainly fulfilling. I've gotten to meet some really cool, amazing, intuitive, and kind people doing this. Many of whom have demanded that I mention the stream's existence here so more people can find it. No, seriously, many demanded it. So hey, I'm Napoleon the 7th. Most people call me Nap. You can find me over at Twitch, 4:30 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Mondays and Fridays, and that's enough shilling. It feels weird to do that. My point was I got to meet lots of people, not just there, also here in the comments. It's been a thrill to do so. I've never been more fulfilled than in these past handful of months and years, and while I don't truly expect this to ever be more than a passion project, it does still feel like I've met me, or at least who I am for a passing time. So I'm making this to maybe document a conversation with myself more than anything, but also in case anybody else has been putting off this conversation or needed an avenue to word it. This movie inherently asks you to consider who you'll be. Lewis getting to meet his future self, Goob getting his fresh restart, and a myriad of other incipient characters. It explores a future that, while ideal, isn't what Lewis thought it would be. And I think in that is an important thought to consider. If maybe you or I or anybody has been too hung up on who we think we'll be that we're unwilling to consider meeting who we could be. I think ultimately I made this video as a greeting. To say hi, open Walt's door of curiosity, and welcome in who I may next be. And hey, maybe you'll answer that door too. As happy as it is, you never know who you might meet. Anyway, I'll see you next time.